My husband sent me a text on the morning he died. I didn't see it until 3 days after we buried him. His name was Paul. He was 63 years old. He had a bad heart, had known about it for 4 years, managed it carefully, took his medication every morning with black coffee at the kitchen table before I was even awake. He was not a man who talked about dying. He was a man who got up early and fixed things and paid attention and trusted very few people completely. He died on a Wednesday in November, cardiac arrest. He was alone in his home office when it happened, and I was at the grocery store 12 minutes away, and I have made peace with that, mostly. Some things you just carry. The funeral was that Saturday. His brother Dennis came with his wife Carol. His sister Margot came from Phoenix. Neighbors, a few people from the company he'd retired from. The house was full for 2 days, the way houses get full after someone dies. Casseroles on the counter, coats piled on the bed, people saying the right things in the wrong voices. I was in survival mode. I was not reading texts. On the Saturday after the funeral, 3 days later, the house was finally quiet. Everyone had gone home. I was sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee and the specific silence of a house that used to have someone in it and now doesn't. I picked up my phone for the first time in days. I had 47 unread messages, condolences, logistics, people checking in. And at the very bottom, sent at 7:43 in the morning on the day Paul died, before I had even left for the grocery store, was a text from my husband. Check the blue folder in my desk drawer, the bottom one. Don't tell anyone. I love you. P. I read it 4 times. Then I walked down the hall to his office and I opened the bottom drawer of his desk and I found a blue folder with my name on it, Margaret, written in his handwriting on the tab. I sat down on the floor of his office right there and I opened it. And I want to tell you what was inside, because Paul left it for me so I would know, and I think some part of him also left it so that I would eventually tell someone. So I'm telling you. Inside the blue folder were 3 things: a letter, a printed bank statement with certain lines highlighted in yellow, and a photograph I had never seen before. I read the letter first. It was 2 pages written by hand on plain white paper, dated 6 weeks before he died. Paul wrote that he'd been noticing something for about 4 months, that money had been going missing from a joint investment account he and his brother Dennis had maintained together since their father died 12 years ago. The account held the remainder of their parents' estate, not a fortune, but significant, around $180,000 when Paul had last checked it properly, split equally between the 2 brothers. Paul had gone to check the balance in August for a routine review. The balance was $44,000. He wrote that he had spent 3 weeks going through the transaction history before he said anything to anyone. 11 withdrawals over 14 months, each one between $8,000 and $19,000, each one authorized using Dennis's signature as the account co-manager, each one transferred to an external account Paul didn't recognize. He wrote that he had asked Dennis about it directly, in person, in September. Dennis said it was a temporary situation, that he had borrowed against the account for a business investment that was about to return, that he would have it restored before Paul even noticed, that Paul should not mention it to Carol or to anyone in the family because it would cause unnecessary panic. Paul wrote, "I wanted to believe him. He is my brother, and I have known him for 60 years, but something about the way he said it, too smooth, too prepared, told me he had been waiting for me to ask and had the answer ready before I finished the question. So I came home and I called an attorney." The attorney's name was James Calloway. Paul had met with him twice in October. James had advised him to document everything before taking any formal action, in case Dennis attempted to claim the withdrawals were authorized or misremembered. The highlighted bank statement in the folder was Paul's documentation, every withdrawal marked, the external account number circled, a note in Paul's handwriting at the bottom, account traced to LLC registered in Carol's name, not Dennis. Carol. Paul's sister-in-law, the woman who had stood in my kitchen 2 days earlier eating a casserole someone from church had dropped off, telling me how devastated Dennis was, how close the two brothers had been, how Paul had meant everything to this family. The woman who had come to my husband's funeral and cried. The LLC was in her name. The photograph was the third thing in the folder. It was a printed screenshot. Paul had printed it at home, on plain paper, slightly grainy, the kind of image you print when you need a physical record of something that exists only on a screen. It was a text conversation between Dennis and Carol. Paul had not explained in the letter how he obtained it, only that he had, and that James Calloway had a copy as well. The conversation was dated October 3rd, 5 weeks before Paul died. Dennis. He knows about the account. He came to me today. Carol. What did you tell him? Dennis. Investment, temporary, will be returned. He seemed to accept it. Carol. He won't accept it forever. What happens when he goes back to check? Dennis. We need the rest out before he does anything formal. How much is left? Carol. 44. Maybe 6 weeks before he goes to a lawyer. Dennis. Then we have 6 weeks. I sat with that photograph for a long time. We have 6 weeks. Paul had died 4 weeks after that message was sent. I want to be careful here about what I am saying and what I am not saying. I am not saying that Dennis and Carol caused my husband's death. Paul had a heart condition. His doctors had told us it was serious. The cardiologist said afterward that the cardiac event was consistent with his diagnosis and that there were no indicators of anything beyond natural causes. What I am saying is that my husband found that text conversation, printed it, put it in a blue folder with my name on it, and wrote me a letter asking me not to tell anyone. He had seen the 6-week timeline. He had put 2 and 2 together the same way I was putting them together now, sitting on the floor of his office. And he had decided that the most important thing he could do was make sure I had everything I needed in one place before something happened. Paul was not a dramatic man. He was a prepared man. Those are different things.
Comment blue folder if you're still with me, because what I did next and what James Calloway had already prepared is the part Paul spent 6 weeks making sure would be ready. Stay right here. I called James Calloway on Monday morning. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been expecting me. He said, "Mrs. Ellison, I'm so sorry about Paul. He was a good man, and he was very thorough." James told me that Paul had come to him for the second time in late October, 3 weeks before he died, with everything that was now in the blue folder. He had made copies of all of it. He had also, at Paul's instruction, prepared a formal complaint to the State Financial Regulatory Board and a civil fraud filing naming Dennis and Carol individually, along with the LLC registered in Carol's name. Paul had not filed them yet. He had told James he wanted to give Dennis one more chance to come forward on his own. He never got to make that decision. James said, "Paul asked me to file everything immediately upon his death without waiting for instruction from the family. He was very specific. He said he did not want you to have to fight for this alone, and he did not want Dennis and Carol to have time to move or conceal anything before the complaint was on record." He had filed both documents the morning after Paul's funeral. Dennis and Carol had received formal notification 3 days later. The same day I found the text. James told me one more thing before we hung up. He said Paul had come to his second appointment alone, had sat across the desk and reviewed every document carefully, the same way Paul did everything, without rushing, without drama, asking precise questions and writing down the answers. At the end of the meeting, James had asked him why he was being so thorough about the post-death instructions when there was still time to pursue the matter while he was alive. Paul had said, "Because my heart isn't reliable, James, and I am not going to leave Margaret in a room with these people without making sure she has everything she needs to walk out of it." I held the phone after James said that, and I didn't speak for a moment, because that was Paul. That was exactly Paul. Not dramatic, not sentimental, just looking at the practical reality of a situation and making sure the person he loved would be okay in the version where he wasn't there to help. Dennis called me on a Tuesday. He said he had received some paperwork from an attorney. He said there had been a terrible misunderstanding. He said Paul had never fully understood how the account worked, that the withdrawals were legitimate, that the LLC was a business Carol had started years ago, and the transfers were loans between family that were always going to be repaid. He said it warmly, patiently, the voice of a man who had been preparing this explanation for some time. I let him finish. Then I said, "Dennis, Paul knew about the text messages. He had a copy. So does James Calloway. So does the State Financial Board as of 4 days ago." The line was quiet for a long time. Then Dennis said he needed to speak with his attorney. I said that sounded like a good idea. That was the last conversation we had. The civil case settled 8 months later. The full $136,000 that had been removed from the account was returned, plus interest, plus legal fees. Dennis and Carol did not contest the settlement, which James said was what people do when the evidence is clear enough that contesting it would only make things worse. There were no criminal charges. That was a decision I made, with James's guidance, because going through a criminal trial would have taken years and consumed more of my life than Dennis and Carol had already taken. Some people will disagree with that decision. I understand why, but I had already given enough of my time to what they did. I was not going to give them more. I kept the blue folder. It sits in the bottom drawer of Paul's desk, in the same place I found it. Some mornings I open the drawer just to see it sitting there, not because I need to read it, just because it's the last thing he built for me, and there's something steadying about knowing it's there. Paul left me a lot of things when he died: the house, some money, 40 years of photographs, and a coffee maker he loved that I will never replace, and a green wool blanket he kept on his chair in the office that I now keep on mine. But the blue folder is the thing I think about most, because it is proof that even at the end, when he was sitting with a 6-week timeline and a bad heart, and a brother he had loved for 60 years who was counting the money before he was cold, even then, Paul's first thought was not about himself. It was about making sure I would be okay. I don't tell this story because I want you to feel sorry for me. I tell it because there is a version of this story where I never found that text, where I went on grieving, and Dennis and Carol kept the money, and I never knew what Paul had spent his last 6 weeks building in quiet, and the blue folder sat in that drawer until someone else found it, or didn't. That version almost happened. If I had checked my phone 1 day earlier, before the grief fog lifted enough to read messages, I might have said something to someone. I might have mentioned it at the wrong moment, and everything Paul had built so carefully would have had time to become complicated. He knew that. That is why he said, "Don't tell anyone." He was protecting the plan, even from me, because he trusted me to find it when the time was right, and he trusted himself to make the plan tight enough that finding it at the right time would be enough. Here is what I want to leave you with today. The people who love you most are not always the loudest ones in the room. Sometimes they are the ones getting up early, paying attention to things no one else notices, building something quietly in the background that you won't find until you need it most. Don't mistake their quiet for distance. Don't mistake their stillness for indifference. And if someone you love ever sends you a text that says, "Check the blue folder," check it. Even if it takes you 3 days, even if the house is full of people, find a quiet Saturday morning and open the drawer, because what's inside might be the most important thing they ever said to you. Comment below and tell me, has someone you loved ever protected you from something you didn't even know was coming?
This is Silent Rank. I'll see you in the next one.